yeah, it's that's our family. It was my grandmother's brothers that started the Weis ice blocks up there in Toowoomba, and they had the Weis restaurant and Weis catering, and yeah, the rest is history.
I'm going to take this chat with me to there and say, hey, I want a lunch. I know Gary.
But let me know who you talk to, because not even I can do that.
Mate, you've just come back from the British Grand Prix and the Tour de France and all those things. It's kind of like the Grey Nomads tour on steroids, mate. What's the go with all that stuff?
Well, none of us are getting any younger, mate. And it's time to tick off some bucket lists. So,
Had you been to a Grand Prix before?
No. I've been an F1 tragic for many years. Ever since they started the Melbourne Grand Prix, I've always promised myself and mates, that follow F1 with me.
I go back to remember watching the Senna Prost thing, with that whole lineage back. It was amazing.
The good old days when safety didn't matter.
Exactly.
Mate, just legends of the F1 scene. But yeah, I've never got down to Melbourne, and I'll tell you the real reason is you should try and get tickets, mate. It is frantic.
Was it easy to get them in Britain, was it, for the British Grand Prix?
It was, because they released them very, very early.
Right.
And you got to remember the size of the British Grand Prix is massive. I think over the 4 days they had close to 500,000 people through the gates. Just enormous.
Norris won that one, didn't he?
Norris did, yeah. Home Grand Prix. And again, it's more than just an F1 race. It's goddamn a music festival. You had some massive names playing. A young fella by the name of I forgot his name. Sam Fender. Wow, what a talent. Adris Elba, Fatboy Slim. Wow, each night there was massive entertainment on the stage, on the infield, and just huge crowds just there to have fun and soak up the atmosphere. So,
mate, do you think our Aussie Oscar will get there, or what do you reckon?
Mate, I think McLaren are playing silly buggers, because when you've got a talent like Oscar, and they're still splitting their hairs between Piastri and Norris, I think that's dangerous. I'd be putting all my eggs in one basket and making sure that we got one across the line, because let's face it, Verstappen can pull anything out of the bag, and who knows,
He's great. He's probably still the premier driver, but I mean, you've got to weigh in what the cars are doing, everything else. But Oscar at his age, like 23 or whatever he is, and you think the next 10 years, it's like, what's this kid going to do? It's absolutely.
And they're all baby faces, There's outside of Alonso is 40, and I forgot his name now. How dare I? 7-time world champion. These guys are obviously late in their careers, but I mean, wow, these young kids, they're all baby faces. They're all in their early 20s, and they're doing amazing things.
It's so funny. I did a functional some time ago now. Excuse me, my voice is a bit faint tonight. I've had this sinus thing going on, but I did this function with the Queensland Bulls cricket team a while ago. And you see them on the field, they look all like men, but you see them off the field and they're like, you realise, hang on, these are kids. They're like kids playing these premier sports at the moment. They're just, you forget how young they are when they're doing all these premier things. And to be in a car that's going at 350 k's an hour and just doing what they do is amazing. But you then also went and did the Tour de France, right? You're out front.
Another bucket list item. I've been a tragic, lycra wearing mammal. I think this is my 15th season, I think, competitively riding and racing. Started in my very early 40s. Just felt like I needed to get healthy again after living a very unhealthy lifestyle, and it's probably the best thing I've ever done. And with that, comes following the international, or the UCI, following the tours, the major events, and all the events, all the races that go on around the world, not just your main tours like your Tour de France, your Tour of Italy, Tour of Spain, but also then your monument events. So yeah, I've been following cycling now for a decade and a half. So the penultimate event.
Did you and Julie like actually ride ride the thing, or did you like tour around it and watch it, or what was the experience that you did?
Well, effectively, you've got to pick your stages. So some stages are flat stages where not a hell of a lot happens until the very end, where there's a sprint. Other stages are very hilly. So obviously when the riders come past you and they're climbing a hill, they're going probably 3 times slower than what they are in a dash sprint at the end of a race. So you pick where you want to sort of have a look at the race and obviously what stage it's at. But the challenge is because it's probably one of the, if not the biggest outdoor event on the planet, it attracts a serious crowd. So they shut the roads off early. So you got to plan where you're going to be at what time, and then not only that, you got to plan your exit because you then got to get to the next stage. So you got to make sure wherever you are, you got to get out quickly. We did take our bikes over, so we had our own bikes with us, so we could sort of ride from where we potentially were staying, which was mostly caravan parks, because we had the big camper van, 4-berth caravan with the 3 of us in there, 3 guys, myself, Gary and his brother Stephen, who were from the UK originally. So yeah, 3 of us basically picking and choosing what stages we went to. So we probably saw, I don't know, I would say at least half the stages. But you got to remember, you're in France, so there's so much to see, and we also wanted to do sightseeing, plus we wanted to do riding. So seeing the stage, riding and sightseeing, you can't do it all, but we try to do as much as we possibly can. But yeah, an amazing 3 weeks. And then we spent about 3 days at the very end sort of hanging out in Paris and soaking up the atmosphere there.
Mate, of course, we met when you was a drummer, and I'll get to that in a minute. Another mate of mine, Dave Harden, was a drummer with me in a band called the Corporation, and his missus is a I don't know if you know Dave, but his missus is a big bike rider as well, and they often go over there and do a lot of the rides. But she goes over and does the rides. Dave, he's amazing. He's like close to my age. He's playing cricket. He's doing all these other things all the time. I can't even see the ball coming anymore. But I'd see him on the trip, and he'd be like, doing all these selfies on him in this pub in England and that pub in England and all these other pubs while his missus is out doing the hard yards. So I think he's got it worked out pretty well. But mate, we did meet when you were a good drummer, but now you run a massive marketing company, SBIM, which we'll talk about in a while, and you're like kind of king of that hill. But mate, you're a muso at heart. So I'm not going to let you get away from talking about where your roots came from, brother.
Oh, how far back do you want to go, mate? I mean, I've been very blessed, incredibly blessed with my music career, and I'll probably pick it up at a point. You interviewed Barry Bull recently.
Yeah.
My introduction to Barry,
the owner of Toombul Music back in the day, and he's also head of CBS Records before it became Sony Music in Australia, and so that just to put some concept about who Barry is.
Mm-hmm. Barry, I went to school with these 2 boys. That's where I met Justin and Gavin. Justin was in my year at school. I went to Indooroopilly High, came up from Canberra. Dad was in the Air Force and decided to retire. And
you in the Air Force?
Dad was in the Air Force, yes. And
your dad?
Dad was in the Air Force, yeah. So he was in the Air Force for 21 years, and when he retired, he moved back to home base, which was Queensland, and we settled in Brisbane. And lumped myself into Indooroopilly High, and that's where I met Justin and Gavin. And lo and behold, Justin and Gavin's dad was Barry, who owned the music shop. And it was just an introduction and a bit of a chat with common friends that we got together. And before you know it, I'm around at Barry's place with the 2 boys with my drum kit and his 2 kids on guitar, and we're jamming away. And my brother was an up and coming keyboard player, so he came and joined the band. So all of a sudden, we had this little band going, and found ourselves a bass player, young fella by the name of Andrew Roots, who went on to do some amazing things. He was an upright bass player, went on to do a lot of different things over in, I think it was Austria, with the Austrian Philharmonic or something over there. Fantastic classical player. But yeah, we had a great time, and Barry coached us and taught us not just how to play our instruments, but be musicians and be entertainers. And I think that was one of the keys. Was we weren't just young kids up there playing; we were actually entertaining. And I think what separated us back then from everybody else trying to do what we were doing was that we actually put a show together. And that's what I love about also what you do, Nick, with your 70s shows and all the shows you put together. It's telling a story through music, not just playing a ragtag bunch of songs. And one of the things that Barry was big on was, the hits of the 50s and 60s. So we grew up playing Shadows and Cliff Richard and, all the songs from that era. So, when I say we, it was primarily, Barry driving it, but, we had our input, but we put together a story and take the audience through, a journey of how music developed and, all those sorts of things through the 50s and 60s. And as I said, made it a show, not just a band up there playing songs. And I think that was the big difference as young entertainers or young musicians, was learning how to entertain, not just become proficient at your instrument.
I think that's one thing that's amazing about Barry is he actually, when I was talking to him, he was telling me a lot of the work when he got into CBS, it was because of the fact of the guitar he had and what he was doing for actually playing music. And it was that era where people in record companies were musicians. I mean, that changed a lot. And, you often have a lot of people in record companies who really, they knew what they were doing about marketing and everything else, but they didn't have that same passion for music. And Barry had that. And mate, if you guys had him as a mentor in your early days through that, because you're not only his advice about entertaining, but also getting and understanding what the industry is really about. Because he was
spot on.
Probably at one stage, probably the most powerful guys in the Australian music.
And we say that, and that's not a throwaway line. The guy, as you know, broke some big names. Meatloaf, Boz Scaggs, Billy Joel here in Australia. And they're wow. Have a look at the history and the legacies that those musicians have left. And Barry was instrumental in breaking those bands.
And back then, he was always so generous to local artists, and even to this day, coming on my little podcast when I gave him a call, he was like so happy to help out and come on board and have a chat. He's one of those people that's been generous back to musicians all the way through his whole career. So it's he's one of those amazing people.
So I mean, I cherish the time that we had as kids, because and when I mean kids, we were still at school. Doing our HSC, and lo and behold, there was always more to it. It was also Barry and Kayleen, Justin Gavin's mum and dad, obviously, and my mum and dad. It was a way to keep us kids off the streets too. Keep our energy focused into something rather than just going and running amok and getting in trouble. So for us, it was coming home and practicing. And Barry would literally pull up in the driveway, get out of the car, and he'd walk up the steps, put his briefcase down, and pick up a guitar and start jamming and teaching us new songs. So that's I can't underestimate the impact that had on me as both a musician and entertainer. But then, as you alluded to before, the stories and understanding the business from a very early age, understanding the music and record industry, both from a retail point of view, a musician's point of view, an agent's point of view, and all the people that go to make this crazy music industry, and understanding how all that linked together. And you couldn't get a better mentor than Barry. So I consider myself to be very blessed that I grew up with that.
And in the industry, mate, where there's so many sharks and people who are you got to watch your back a little bit with people in our industry sometimes, but he was definitely one of the good guys who was a genuinely nice guy, so it was great. But so when I met you, I would think it was the time when Mick Flanders was running Arctic, and I was doing my album, Four Poet Steps album, and you drummed on some of the stuff we did then. I think that was when we first met, and we started doing some gigs together at that time around then. What happened from leaving school to that stage where you were a professional drummer out there? Were you always a musician? Was that where you started from?
Well, when I left school, I went and did a teaching degree. I went to Kelvin Grove University there at QUT and did actually, I can't even call it a degree. It was back then it was a 3-year diploma, and you could choose to do a 4th year and do your degree. And I think
drank a lot at the Normanby Hotel then, obviously.
Yeah, plenty. As they used to do, hang upside down on the rafters and try and scull beers and silly things as you do as uni students.
Yeah.
At that time, honestly, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I enjoyed school. I loved school. I had a ball at school, and you go, well, maybe I'll become a teacher. So I pushed myself through 3 years of uni, but at the same time, I had met Mick, who was working at what's now Pushworth Group. Which was back then, as you know, Manic Promotions back in the day with Manny and Nicky. And lo and behold, through a series of, you might remember the name Keith Haig.
Yeah, I remember Keith, of course.
Yeah, Keithy Haig, the old Cliff Richard of Brisbane. He was working as one of the guitar teachers upstairs. Toombul Music had a music academy, if you remember. It was actually run by the gentleman I mentioned before, Andrew Roots. He was running the music academy upstairs, and I was teaching drums upstairs at the academy, and Keith was teaching guitar. And Keith knew Mick, and Mick was looking for a drummer. So I'd played a few gigs with Keithy Haig, and he dropped my name to Mick. Get a phone call out of the blue, and all of a sudden I'm auditioning down at the East Leagues Club at Cooperoo there, and next minute I'm playing gigs at the Cecil Hotel, and I'm doing.
They were for
looking for cool. Yeah, that was the looking for cool days.
Yeah.
So again,
probably first time at the probably at the Normanby. I think we were loading out, and I remember seeing Mick and Chase at that time, and you would have been probably with them then. That probably was Normanby, I think. Yeah,
look, the Norman, you name it, just about every damn pub in Brisbane. And to be fair, secret, mate, if we weren't gigging, no one was, because we had the agent in the band. You know what I mean? So it doesn't mean we got the best gigs, but we certainly got gigs. Because you had to be at a certain level to play certain gigs, and we're I mean, look, Mick, you've recorded with Mick at Arctic and done your albums, and what a great producer, and obviously that's a whole new story about what he's done over in Nashville and his career. But again, blessed to be associated with musicians of the caliber of Mick Flanders and Chase Sue. That again was just an amazing time in my career. And if I can actually fill in a gap, I was in the crowd when you used to do Fridays, and I was sinking tins, you know what I mean? And you were doing your thing, and it was Christ, it was Nick Phillips, that's what you did on a Friday or Saturday night, whether you're in Brisbane or up at the Sunshine Coast. And I did a bit of time up the Sunshine Coast, but lucky enough, Mum and Dad had a unit up there at Mooloolaba, so we used to go up there and see you at Fridays and go and sink tins and then crash out at the unit. But that was my first introduction to Nick as the entertainer. But then you had obviously spent some time over in the US when you recorded poetry.
Yeah, well, I went to the US in 92, 94, and I came back, and that was when Mick was working at Manic, and he booked me into Fridays up there, and I spent 10 years playing up there. I do every Saturday night, and Tough, you do every Friday night. But one of my great treasures, when you get people tell you stuff that who don't need to tell you stuff, but they do. But I ended up becoming very good friends with Glenn A. Baker, who's one of the music journalists of Australia, and won the Rock Genius Awards on TV shows and everything. But I got nominated one year at Tamworth Golden Guitars with a song of mine called "Not in This Life," and I got this call out of the blue from this guy, Glenn A. Baker, and I'm like, really? And he was one of the judges that year, and he heard the song, and he said there was something about the tonality and just the vibe of that song that he loved, and he thought was one of Australia's best kept secrets. Unfortunately, it stayed a bit of a secret, but he said that. But man, that was what Mick produced. Mick Flanders produced that song and produced that album. songs from the fourth floor. And just to have people like Glenn A. Baker come on and say, he loved the production on that song just so much, or he liked the songwriting, he liked the production, everything else. But I owe so much to Mick for what he influenced on what I did. And Arctic was not. They'd set up a label called Arctic, which became a subsidiary of BMG, and it wasn't an easy journey, and a few things went wrong with the label because it's a hard thing to do. But mate, your experience of going through that with them, through that label journey, led you to actually set up your own record company, correct?
Close. Well, if I'll hit that because there's a little, as I said, there's a little gap there. Mick, I was playing with you when you were doing Four Poet Steps. Sorry, not Four Poet Steps, Poetry and Beer. When we started doing all the shows
and back from America,
at Fridays with when we first came back with bass player, what was his name?
I remember Derek.
Yeah. And that's where I first sort of got to again play with Nick, which was amazing. And that's sort of where I suppose our association started with the label side of things. But essentially what happened, Mick went and had his vision with Arctic, but at the same time, I got a tap on the shoulder from Streetwise Records, which was at that time being led by Brian Cadd. So Brian, I was labels manager for Streetwise under the guidance of Brian, and again, what a bloody mentor. I mean, where do you start with Brian's career? You know what I mean? So one of Australia's premier songwriters, singer-songwriters, and that's obviously where I got to meet and work and know Glenn Shorrock and that all the artists of that ilk that Brian had basically grown up and built his career around.
Because Brian, people don't know Brian Cadd was in Axiom with Glenn Shorrock before he went to Little River Band, right? They were in the same band together.
Yes, what they used to say, Australia's first supergroup, you know what I mean? So again, just an amazing time to be working in an independent label, under the guise of someone that had lived and breathed and done it, had been to the stars in the music industry. But again, Brian has a very he has a passion for grounds roots music, and he was producing a couple of albums, Susie McKenzie, Dave Ritter, a couple of other local artists, and someone you and I went to memorial the other day, Andy McDonald, who was one of the guitar players in the Corporation band that you mentioned a little bit earlier, and another fantastic talent, local talent. I got to work with Andy very closely in recording and releasing and doing his album. But as you mentioned, Arctic is an imprint of BMG. Streetwise is an imprint of Warner Music. Right. So Brian, through his contacts, had organised a publishing deal through Warner Chappell.
Who was the head of Warner Publishing? What's his name? The guy back then, legendary. I can see his face actually, but
dude, I'm not even going to open my mouth because I'll embarrass myself and I'll get it wrong. I can picture the face, but some of these names now. Yeah. Actually, funny we mentioned that. When we were at Andy's thing the other week, there was so many faces there. I'm going, I know that person. I'm going, but zero. Nothing.
We all needed name badges, mate, because we hadn't seen so many people for like 30.
I know.
And but we've got a bit rounder and everything on the journey. And you're saying, I was actually one stage, I don't know if you were in that conversation, but I was talking to, who was I talking? It might have been, I can't remember, but I was talking to someone, and Tim Gaze was there, and I was talking to Tim, and we're like, sorry, who are you? And I'm like, who are you? So we put together, it's like, Tim Gaze is great guitarist. And I'm like, oh, that's right, of course.
Yeah, I know. Again, it was I was going to say it was a sad occasion. It wasn't a sad occasion. It was actually a celebration. Sad, obviously, of Andy's passing, but it was a celebration of his life. And you understand that how many people musicians touch, in very different ways. And it was a celebration of his career and his life. But it also brought together. I don't know whether I've ever been in the last Jesus, 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, a celebration of local musicians and local artists that we're in that room at that particular point in time for 3 or 4 hours and just loving life, celebrating music, and getting reacquainted.
Mm-hmm. Mate, Andy, the corporation boys back in those days, they were pretty wild. They they hit life pretty hard.
Yeah, that's an understatement. Yeah.
They had another band called Revolution Blues, which would do like kind of nude performances at nurses' parties and things like that, and they're pretty full on. But I remember one time, Andy, we were playing up the Sunshine Coast, and he'd finished the gig, and we lost him. We didn't know where he got to, and we caught up with him about a day later. I don't know how we kept catching up without mobile phones that day. I really don't. Those days, I don't know how we did it, but we found him somehow. And it ended up back at this house with some lovely young person, and he'd woken up and came down the stairs not knowing where he was or who he was with. And the whole family was sitting there. Hi, Andy, everybody else come down and have breakfast and everything else. He's like, he had breakfast. He had no idea where he was, what he'd done. Yeah, these days you shouldn't laugh about those things, I suppose. But it was funny. It was like, no, it was just having fun, and like just no one got hurt or anything. It was just like, yeah, he was a free spirit, Andy, and mate, he would. I put a little thing up on my. If you go back in the podcast here, guys, there's a little tribute I did to him because we found a desk tape where he did a version when we'd perform, and I think we were playing that one. I think it was a Blue Light Disco at Bundaberg back in those days. The police would put them on, and there was like hundreds and hundreds of kids there, and we were doing the show, and he would do a version of LaGrange.
Oh, yeah.
And he did it well, man, and the guitar solo is so good. It's just a desk tape, but people go back through the podcast, look for Andy McDonald, have a look at his performance of LaGrange, and he was one of Queensland's really, really true artists. If he'd been born in like an American city, he'd be a major star. He'd be a major star, but it's the way it goes.
It is. She's a tough, cruel game sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So, mate, Streetwise Records, what happened there? What was the story? You became a record executive, brother.
Well, lo and behold, yeah. Again, my official title was labels manager. So, I was under that guise. It was sort of a case of also doing AR. So again, I got introduced to a lot of local musicians, not only local but international and national artists. But Streetwise also, Brian had the vision that there was more to it than just rock and pop. So he created Stallion Records, which was another one of the labels that sat beside Streetwise, which was the rock pop label, and also created Belly Laugh Records, which was a comedy label. So, you remember the name Steady Eddy? He was one of the artists that we signed.
I interviewed Steady a number of weeks ago. There's a podcast up with Steady, and I'm actually supporting him in some of his up and coming shows. Cool. I'm going to be the avenue.
Yeah. I got to tell you, just before we move on, because I'll forget, I'll tell you this quick story about Steady. Maybe you remember when the Fat Boys were managing him. They were on the bill and supporting Midnight Oil. And one of the shows that they were doing was, I think it was Oz Music Week, and it was down at the Star City Casino down in Sydney. And as you know, Chris, Steady, doesn't get around all that well. And we had to get from the dressing room to the stage. And I don't know how I got through Europe and France without getting lost, but both of us have come out of the dressing room and gone completely the wrong way. So instead of, stage exit left, we've gone stage exit right, and ended up in the guts of the underground of the Star City Casino. And here's me and Steady, lost.
He was saying he couldn't find his way. You couldn't find your way out anyway.
Couldn't find our way out. We were trying to get through the exit doors and fire alarms. It was an absolute gong show. But one of the funniest moments, and we did finally end up getting out. And again, we ended up somewhere in the bloody casino and ended up having a staff member to then take us back to the venue. And by then everyone's panicking, wondering where the bloody hell, the opening act is. And needless to say, the show started a couple of minutes late while Bozo here and Steady found their way to the stage. That if we had gone left, would have been about a 20 meter walk. But Christ knows the distance we covered that night. But Steady and me getting lost in the Star City Casino in Sydney was a crazy night.
I'll tell you a more recent one. We've got a mutual friend, Shay, who does these podcasts in his sauna. He imports saunas. He does these chats with saunas. And he also, with his sauna, has got the ice bath. And Steady recently did an interview with him. And before after the interview, they said, do you want to jump in for 2 minutes into the ice bath? And Chris was like, yeah, sure, no worries. Yeah, do it. What happened was he was in there for 2 minutes, but it took him like 7 minutes to get him in and out. Hey, quick commercial break. Big shout out to our sponsor for today's episode, which is me, Nick Phillips. Look, I've got to thank myself so much. I couldn't be doing the show without me. And if you get a chance, check out the sponsor's website, www.nickphillips.com. Check out my music, my videos, my bio, all that stuff, and maybe contact me and book me for a gig. That would be great. But thanks, Nick, for your sponsorship. Back to the show. You can imagine what that was causing.
No, we one of the things that Brian had organised. Not only did we have the imprint with with Warner here in Australia, we had an imprint with BMG over in the UK, and we launched the comedy label over there. There was another young comedian by the name of Haskell Daniel, who was. I don't know what they call like a beatboxer voice. He could, basically rip off anybody's voice. And he released an album called Phone Answering Machinerama. And it was a whole pile of funny answering machine messages using all these, famous voices. But Brian had organised us to launch the label and run a show over in the UK in London, utilising the Walkabout Inns, which are Ozpat, Aussie Pat venues. And we'd literally done the Tamworth Country Music Festival, launching country music stars, jumped on a plane going from 40-degree heat over to London in, I won't say minus 40, but God, it was cold. It was horrible, January. And did a series of shows over in the Walkabout Inns. And I remember landing there. It was the night of Steady's show, and we walked into the Walkabout Inn at Shepherd's Bush. And kid you not, Nick, it was like Bono had just walked into the room. He was instantly recognisable by the crowd because they're all, expat Aussies, and the place erupted. And it was people, knew he was in town, and it was one of the best nights. But he was treated like royalty in the middle of London in an Aussie pub. But that was the effect that Steady had on him. And that was another great thing was comedy travelled. There was so many opportunities for us to sort of work across the three labels, and comedy was a great industry to work in. Country music was fantastic. We had even back then we had Cole Elliott on the comedy label, but he could also work Tamworth. So, a bit of a cross promotion. So again, that country music, scene was really cool back then. It was up and coming and growing. And, the rock pop side of things. So, again, I was very blessed in being able to work in multiple genres across the music industry and seeing how all those industries, had similarities, but they also had, their own idiosyncrasies. So very, very lucky to get exposed to all that.
Well, it's great you did that work with Steady because, such a unique talent with, the challenges he has around him, just amazing. And it was a bit of an update. Apparently he's working on getting a TV show up and running. He's working on, and I say doing these live shows again, getting back out there. And I'm so blessed to be able to, I'm just working on now what my set's going to be to open up for him. And I'm really looking forward to that. But mate, you talk about phone messages. When I lived in Los Angeles, 92, 94, we had our band over there we were working with, and our guitarist was a guy called Pat Wilson. And Pat was just a great character. But his phone message, when you'd call him, he had all these really rare records, and he would just put the rare record, like change it. And one of them was the Beatles singing "I Want to Hold Your Hand" in German.
In German.
And you just call him to hear what these messages were. It was like these amazing rare records. That was great, mate. So you went from record company to somehow I've got a missing link here on how you became a marketing guru. Obviously, through everything you've learned, you've sort of done all that stuff. But what was your progression from there to where you are now?
Well, I suppose, back then you wore a lot of hats. Even though, if I handed you my business card, it was labels manager, but, you were also the guy that took out the bins. You're also the guy that wrote the press releases. You're also the guy that got on that good old thing called the phone and hustled and rang. And, it was all about, at the end of the day, I think, this broad term called marketing. It was all about, I suppose, what I used to call it, bums on seats. I don't even pretend to know what the industry looks like, these days. I've got a 19-year-old son who's working his way through the DJ world, something that's completely foreign to me. I've never worked in that space, but I'm on a steep learning curve. But what they do and how they promote and what they do is a world apart from back in the day when we had rave and time off, the street press. Used to.
It was a bit of a controlled environment compared to now, where it's just like an avalanche of content and information all the time, isn't it? It was more. I imagine back in those, and you're the expert, but I imagine back in those days, you knew what the laneways were that you could work in. Now it's like it's just a thunderstorm.
Yeah, it's probably the best way I can describe it is, the marketing today, particularly with what we've got. Is it easier in a way? Is it harder? Yeah, in a way, because it's so fragmented. It's our attention is so spread across so many different channels and different marketplaces. And again, back in the day, it was there was this definite marketing cadence. There was this routine, and it worked. And I suppose, as technology started to come through and things started to improve, all of a sudden we've now got this thing called the internet. And what really grabbed my attention and what changed my career was this little invention called an MP3 file. Yep. That revolutionized and changed my whole entire, trajectory and my whole entire career, because all of a sudden I realized back then, again, through just being in the right place at the right time, talking about the right people, that this little piece of technology, this MP3, was going to revolutionize the music industry. So that had me fascinated, because what I saw back then was a technology and a channel and something that independents could harness that was going to level the playing field somewhat. You know what I mean? It was no longer about just simply being able to get in and have the record rep pitch at the radio station, or back in the day, when the record reps, and remembering I worked for Barry at Toombul Music for 3 years. I used to remember the label reps coming in and pitching their latest releases, and how many do you want, and this and that, and putting up displays in stores and things like that. But I could see that this little piece of technology was going to revolutionize the industry. So I made sure I got onto that, which then sort of went, okay, well, now what does this look like? How do we utilize that? Which then led me to web development and understanding how to create artist sites, not just MySpace, but really starting to utilize the web. So I was very instrumental in getting artists to develop their own brand and get websites developed and get their music on MP3, even though it took you 10 minutes to download a file. That was the accepted thing. These days you just wouldn't do it, but back then it was almost a novelty, so people were prepared to put up with slower download times. But at the end of the day, I saw the opportunity for independents to start leveling that playing field. So that's where I sort of started moving into that online marketing space, and just kept on that wave. So yeah, that's what sort of I suppose in a condensed timeline, is sort of got me to where I've been now doing what I'm doing, which is effectively digital marketing for business now. I think this is the 16th year of doing this. So it's been a long.
You're not both days, are you? It's like businesses across the board that you work with.
Well, as you can see, sorry, this isn't a shameless plug. I just haven't got out of my shirt. But today we specialise predominantly in working with e-commerce stores as a growth accelerator. So one of the, again, just being at the right place at the right time and understanding trends and where the markets move. I saw, obviously, even before COVID, and COVID was really the thing that just accelerated this, was that online space. E-commerce was going to be the next opportunity. It's made a lot of people very, very rich. So I saw a need and a segment of the market that wasn't well being served, and sort of jumped in there and started working with e-commerce store owners to develop their marketing and develop their online branding and get the technology right. But again, that all comes from a marketing background. Between 2000 and started in 2000, I went back and did a master's degree in business, majoring in marketing. And you may remember that was the same time that I was running O'Leary's with a couple of partners, that little pub on Caxton Street. Another great opportunity, to expose local talent and have musicians come and play in there. And again, it was also the start of being able to use digital technologies to promote. And that's really where it all came from. And it's been a passion of mine for as I said, almost 2 decades now, the whole online marketing space. And being very blessed to be able to make a career out of it. Probably my 3rd, 4th career, and still going strong.
Mate, when I do these chats, it's not like we sit down and we plan what we're going to chat about. It's just like, let's chat and see where it goes to and all that stuff. And I don't want to be tapping into your experience, inappropriately, but I would like to ask you a couple of questions along those lines of a few things mentioned there. When you look at online stores and online branding and everything like that, obviously a lot of those stores have their physical product. They know what their product is, and it's about getting that product to the people, all that stuff. One of the challenges we have in the music sector is that, and I'll digress a little bit. When I spent a lot of time, 10 years, doing stuff in China. I saw a trend while I was there. It was an interesting time because they transitioned their industry, the music industry, from being something that was very much government subsidized. It was like artists were basically employed by companies, government-run companies, and they were paid wages to go out and perform and do songs, and they'd have made money from their records, everything else. A big change happened with them when the government decided they wanted to move a lot of people in the rural areas up in their standard of living, and the focus of that was how they would interact with and use the internet to do that. And China, way before we could do it, if you lived in the most remote parts in China, you could order something from a major Beijing store and it would be delivered either that day or the day after. They had like such a system down going so well. But they also, to encourage that use of the internet, they really got behind promoting and helping develop the art sector, because the art sector, the film, digital content, was all driving a lot of the use of the internet. And it was almost overnight they got in behind a lot of musicians who'd been signed with labels or government labels, and they encouraged them to start their own label, basically, and encouraged them to actually commercialize their content in a way that was much more protected than what we have today. So they did it that way, where I think they've set it up much better as an industry than we have here. Here, while you separate us from, put us in with other stores and other products like that, we can use those type of platforms. But the problem is, because of streaming, because of the way hasn't got any protection around it, really, our product doesn't hold value because it's just so easy to, you have to basically give it away on streaming. You can't commercialize your product. From a marketing point of view, or someone who knows the industry from the marketing side and the music side, do you see in the future there will be a way where we can better commercialize our music at all, or is it has a horse gone and we're not going to be able to shut that gate?
Wow, great question. And look, to be frank, I don't know if I'm any sort of authority to sort of answer that, but I'll give you my.
I'm sorry to throw this at you too, mate. I don't know it's out of left field and all that.
No,
But it's
I'll
just
give you my
something
personal spin on it. I think the way you've described that whole, it's become, from what I saw from working in a retail environment, being on a Thursday night, right? The amount of people that would come into Toombul Music on a Thursday night, it was an event. You'd go to the local shopping centre on a Thursday night, you go in the music store and you start thumbing through all the latest albums and the releases and, remember Cass singles, and all the CD singles were still there. The records, as we know it, had pretty much demised. It was the year of the decade of the CD, but it was still a moment. It was an event. It was something that you shared. That tactile element of that CD, and I know as a label we did the same thing. We made sure that when that CD went out and someone bought that CD, there was not only just the music; it was an experience. That opening up that CD case and sliding out the notes, and it had the lyrics in it, and had photos, and there was this real connection, I think, to the music more than just the song. There was a connection to the artist. There was a lot shared. And I think what's happened is obviously the digitization of that has commoditized the music, and we've lost that tactile thing that, again, we used to sit around and share. And actually, you can see over my shoulder there, my son bought me that for Father's Day, the Kiss Best of the Solo albums. On record. I can't play it. I just got to stand it up there and have a look at it. But there's something about that. As much as I'm still a fan of tactile music, I still have my music collection. I still have a CD player. Don't have a record player, but I still hold value in that tactile element. And I think the biggest demise has been the removal of that. Having said that, though, I think what's replaced it has been the merchandise and the event that now comes along with it, which is obviously the gigs and all that sort of thing. So I think this age is now the tactile element is the show. Again, if I reference my son Mitchell, the amount of DJ shows that he goes to in Brisbane is sensational. Because that's their tactile part. There's nothing really exciting about playing it on Spotify or downloading on Apple Music. Or you got the song, but you don't have anything else of the experience. And I think the biggest challenge now is, I think the horse is bolted. If I put a spin on it, I sort of put it like, it's almost like the printer and cartridge industry. You go buy a printer for $100, but it costs you a fortune to buy the cartridges. The value's not in the printer; it's actually in the cartridge. Sorry, the value is not in the printer; it's in the cartridges. So the focus, I think, needs to shift for musicians these days. Is they've got to again put an element of, a tactile element to it. And if I hark right back to what we were saying earlier, it's more than just playing songs. It's putting on that show, and I think people will buy that show. They will buy something that's not just a live collection of songs. So I think, do I see a big change in it swinging back to what you were talking about, how they've done it in China? No, I don't. But do I see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel? Yes, I think it's this swing back to live entertainment. And I think that's what we've got to continue to fight for. And I know you're leading that charge, Nick, and you're to be commended about that, trying to keep that that local and live element going, gigs, and getting people involved in giving them an outlet to play, because that's the tactile element. So I hope that answers your question. But
no, great answer, really good. No, I wasn't expecting an outcome, but you've kind of come with one, which is great. And I, as I say, it was just something that you triggered, with your experience. It was something I thought was worthwhile asking. I really appreciate that, because it's like also to. I just put up a episode today with a friend of mine, Glenn Bidmead from Sydney, and Glenn's a bit like he's very much what I do in Brisbane. Glenn's done in Sydney for a long time, and we do similar things. We write. We've always tried to push our originals, but we've made our living out of doing the cover gigs and everything else. And I was chatting to him, and we are talking for a while about how this panic about AI at the moment. How people can get online and write their own songs and everything else. It's like, well, there's always been other people writing songs. It doesn't mean I can't keep writing my songs and create my journey. But I think the challenge for musicians now, which kind of ties in with what you're saying, I think, is how do you find that way to create a human element, something that you connect to, whether it was the album going back in the day or the CD cover, or now maybe merchandise or something else you come up with, where you're connecting people still through that physical presence. It just needs to change and be different. AI is not going to take that away. It's not going to stop me from writing songs. Sure, people can get on there and write their own songs, whatever. Happy days. There's always a million songs out there that I was competing against. It doesn't really change any of that. There are assets of the AI thing that help us out a lot. Like when I finish this chat, I'll run our audio channels through an AI thing to just try and balance them up and make sure that's good and hopefully make this podcast a little bit better. So there's tools we can use, but certainly not going to be my competition. I don't believe is going to be an AI song written. Yeah, that's people do that. They're going to do it, but I'm still going to write my songs. And the same way you're saying, I have to be smart enough to figure out if I can't sell a CD anymore, I can't actually commercialize the song. Well, how do I use it as a marketing asset to sell something else that is tangible? Correct.
Yeah. That's Nick. That's where I think the industry needs to, for want of a better word, realign. Otherwise, I think again we're facing. We're commoditized, and I think regardless of where the technology goes, and I think the music industry is a great example, is that I still believe business is done on a handshake, and it's done face to face, and it's done building relationships. Even though today, and I'm probably going to contradict myself here a little bit, but even today, I don't have a physical relationship with my customers. I don't actually meet them physically because now it's accepted. I've got customers all around Australia, and I probably only met a handful of them, and only probably those that are local. But I'm still able to build relationships digitally. Similar to what we're doing. We're still communicating, and I think a lot of the challenge with the artists, and even I've had this discussion, with Mitchell, my son, about it's okay to have these TikToks and Instagrams and Facebooks and YouTube channels, but there's nothing, there's nothing more permanent, and there's nothing, more valued than a relationship. And you've got to step outside that digital world as a vehicle. But I still think, you build the foundation of a career on personal relationships, and as you and I are probably, good examples of it. I mean, our relationship, Dan, goes back 30 years. We may not see each other every year. We may not see each other for a while, but that connection was made many years ago, and you just never know when the paths cross, and those opportunities, because of those connections, pop up. And I think a lot of that's been lost because we're sort of behold to this digital world. And I just encourage everybody to in the industries to make those associations, make those connections. As much as you put your time and effort into editing a post that goes up on Instagram and lasts 24 hours before it's down the back of the feed, spend a proportional amount of time on actually making relationships. And I tell you now, they're the things that are going to carry you through this industry and any other industry, is those personal relationships. Yes, use the digital technologies. Yes, use all the AI. Yes, use all the tools at your disposal. But I'm still an old school, guy that sort of says, go and make that relationship, because that's the thing that's going to carry you through the tough times, the hard times, the good times.
No, that's great advice, and probably a good point to wrap it up there, mate. I really wanted to catch up with you and chat because you've had such an interesting journey with what you've done from going to see the British Grand Prix to drumming to record labels to doing running a major marketing company now. And mate, being a friend, and I really appreciate the fact that every time I've had to ask a question or done anything, I pick up my phone to Gaz, and he'll answer me and call me back, and we'll have a chat. And you're a very genuine person, buddy, and I really appreciate that. But anything we haven't covered here that you'd like to toss in?
No, and doesn't matter how old we get, you've still got hair and I don't. So you trump me there. So no, look, again, as I said, our paths cross, sporadically, but again, it's the relationship. I value the relationship. Again, probably if I quickly share a story at the end here, that chance meeting, probably a year or two ago, where I popped in and saw you at I think it was the post office, where you were trying to key up a Wednesday or Thursday night, and next minute I'm down there with my little drumsticks, and just the opportunity again to play with people, even though it's been many years, and I know I was rusty as hell and I still can't sing in key, but I think the opportunity to have people come along. We had a ball, and people came along, and I got to share an element of my life that my current friends and circle never even knew I had. And that's special to me. And it's not about showing off, it's about sharing our passion for music. And again, if I can just close off with going, of all the people that I know in the music industry, Nick, and that continue to be out there, week in, week out, gig in, gig out, load in, load out. Here's Nick Phillips, still doing the thing, still keeping it real, and Aussie local and live. So hope I've added some value to your audience, and best of luck with it all, mate. And if you need anything,
mate, thank you for this. Thank you for this chat. Thank you for your friendship, and thank you for everything you've done, mate. But Gary Weis, guys, thank you, mate. I'll put the link up for your web page, if that's right for your business, mate. People want to know some more about your marketing work. I'll put that across this chat. But good to chat to you, brother.
You're welcome, Nick. Be good.
Mate, see ya.